The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. Not the respectful kind of silence that greets a decorated pilot, but the kind that precedes laughter. Major Kestrel Vance carried her helmet under one arm, her flight suit creased in all the wrong places from the overnight transport flight. She was early, always early. That's what 17 years of service taught you, even when the service never quite taught others to take you seriously. The SEAL team occupied the front rows, their tan uniforms still dusty from whatever desert they'd just left. They were the kind of men who measured respect in blood and bullets, not flight hours. Commander Rake Morrison sat at the center, his jaw set in that familiar expression of controlled irritation that flag officers wore when forced to work with assets they didn't request. The mission brief hadn't started yet, but the assessment had. She could feel their eyes tracking the faded patches on her shoulders, the lack of fresh combat decorations, the way she moved with careful precision rather than the swagger they expected. One of the younger SEALs elbowed his teammate and whispered something that made three others smirk. Kestrel had learned long ago that reaction was fuel. She gave them nothing, just found her seat in the back row and waited. The air conditioning hummed. Someone's radio crackled. The projector warmed up with that particular electronic whine that preceded every mission brief she'd ever attended. Commander Morrison stood without preamble and clicked to the first slide. "Operation Ironside," he began, his voice carrying that flat authority of a man who'd sent people to die and learned to live with it. 24 hours from now, we extract a high-value target from a compound 17 clicks inside hostile territory. The window is 90 seconds. Any longer and we're facing a battalion-strength response. The slide changed to show satellite imagery of a mountain compound. Kestrel studied it the way she studied everything, cataloging approaches, wind patterns, egress routes. Morrison continued describing the ground elements approach, the expected resistance, the intelligence that may or may not be accurate. Then he got to the part Kestrel had been waiting for. Air support will be provided by Major Vance in an A-10 Thunderbolt. The room shifted. Several SEALs turned to look at her directly now. One of them, a staff sergeant with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, actually snorted. "A warthog," he said, not quite under his breath. "For this?" Morrison's eyes flicked to him, then away. The message was clear, objection noted but irrelevant. Kestrel stood and walked to the front, each step measured. She'd done this dance before in different rooms with different audiences who all wore the same expression. The A-10 Thunderbolt wasn't sexy. It didn't break sound barriers or carry exotic weapons. It was ugly, slow, and built around a gun so large it seemed mathematically improbable. But Kestrel had flown the Warthog for 12 years, and she knew something these men didn't. The aircraft didn't need to be fast when it could take hits that would vaporize anything else in the air. She clicked to her own prepared slides. "The A-10 carries 11 hardpoints," she began, her voice steady and factual. "For this mission, I'll be configured with AGM-65 Mavericks, Mark 82 bombs, and a full load of 30mm rounds. The GAU-8 Avenger delivers 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium. Effective range against fortified positions is 4,000 feet. The staff sergeant leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "And when their AAA lights you up," Kestrel met his eyes. "The A-10 has redundant systems, manual reversion for all flight controls, and can fly with one engine, one tail, half a wing missing. It's survived worse than whatever mountain gunners are going to throw at it." She could see him processing this, recalculating, but not quite there yet. These men lived in a world where reputation mattered, where the newest technology meant the most lethality. The Warthog was neither new nor particularly reputable outside certain circles. Commander Morrison cleared his throat. "The Major has 3,000 flight hours in combat zones. Her record speaks to capability." It was the kind of endorsement that damned with faint praise. Kestrel didn't let it show on her face. She clicked to the tactical overlay. "Approach vector will be from the northwest, using the mountain ridge to mask radar signature until we're inside 5 clicks. I'll orbit at 12,000 feet until you call for close air support. Response time from call to ordnance on target will be under 45 seconds. One of the other SEALs, an older chief with gray in his beard, nodded slightly. Progress. What's your loiter time? He asked. 3 hours with current fuel load. Tanker support is available if we need to extend. Morrison checked his watch. Wheels up at 0400. Ground element inserts at 0530. Any questions? The staff sergeant raised his hand. Yeah, I got one. He pointed at Kestrel, or more specifically, at her right forearm where the sleeve of her flight suit had ridden up slightly. What's with the ink? Others turned to look. Kestrel glanced down at the tattoo that ran from her wrist to her elbow, mostly hidden but partially visible now. It was intricate, done in sharp black lines that had held their clarity through years and sun exposure. A set of wings wrapped around a sword, with letters woven through the design in a style that looked almost ancient. She'd gotten it a decade ago in a shop off base in Virginia, back when she'd still believed that proving yourself meant something. Personal, she said simply, tugging the sleeve down. The staff sergeant grinned, the kind that wasn't friendly. Looks like one of those tribal things civilians get. You know, trying to look tactical. A few others chuckled. Kestrel felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the one that never quite went away no matter how many missions she flew. The tattoo wasn't tribal. It wasn't civilian, but explaining would only make it worse. She'd learned that lesson too. Gentlemen, Morrison said, voice cutting through the noise. Focus on the mission. The laughter died but didn't disappear. It hung in the air like smoke. The brief continued with logistics, communications protocols, emergency procedures. Kestrel absorbed it all while part of her mind drifted to the flight line where her A-10 waited. The ground crew would be prepping it now, loading weapons, checking systems. That was the world she understood, where performance mattered more than perception. When Morrison dismissed them, the SEALs filed out in small groups, their conversation already moving to gear checks and final preparations. Kestrel gathered her materials and headed for the door, but Commander Morrison's voice stopped her. Major, a word. She turned. He was standing by the projection screen, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sir. This team has worked together for 18 months, he said. They're tight. They trust each other. You're an unknown variable, Kestrel nodded. She'd heard versions of this speech before. I understand, sir. My job is to provide close air support when called. I'll be overhead and ready. Morrison studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A middle-aged pilot past her prime, a diversity checkbox, someone who'd never earned her place in his world. The tattoo, he said finally, it's going to be a distraction. It won't affect my performance, sir. That's not what I mean. He paused, choosing his words carefully. These men need to trust you. Anything that undermines that trust compromises the mission. Kestrel felt something cold settle in her stomach. With respect, sir, if a tattoo undermines their trust, that's a problem with their judgment, not my ink. Morrison's jaw tightened. I didn't write the rules, Major. I just operate within them. Neither did I, sir, but I follow them anyway. For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Morrison nodded curtly and left without another word. Kestrel stood alone in the empty briefing room, the projector still humming, showing a frozen image of the compound they'd be hitting tomorrow. She looked down at her forearm again, pulling the sleeve up to see the full design. The wings weren't decorative. They were specific, precise, modeled after the insignia she'd earned at Fort Rucker when she'd been young enough to believe that competence would always win out over prejudice. The sword was a different story. That represented something else entirely, something she rarely talked about because talking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling things she'd spent years learning to compartmentalize. She pulled the sleeve down and headed for the flight line. The sun was setting over the desert base, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The heat hadn't broken yet, wouldn't until well after midnight. The A-10s sat in their revetments like sleeping predators, ugly and practical and absolutely lethal in the right hands. Hers was tail number 731, same aircraft she'd been flying for 4 years. The ground crew chief, Technical Sergeant Yuma, was supervising the weapon's load. Major, he called when he saw her approaching. We're running ahead of schedule. Should be buttoned up in 30 minutes. Looks good, Chief. She walked the pre-flight inspection herself, checking control surfaces, examining the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, running her hands along the fairings. The A-10 wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. Every rivet served a purpose. Every system had a backup. It was designed by people who understood that combat aviation wasn't about elegance, it was about bringing your pilot home. Loading Mavericks on stations 3 and 9, Yuma reported, consulting his checklist. Mark 82s on 5 and 7. 30 Mike is topped off. You'll be carrying 14,000 pounds of freedom. Kestrel smiled despite herself. Yuma had been working A-10s for 20 years and spoke about them the way other people spoke about classic cars. "What's the word from Intel?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Same as always. Bad guys in the mountains, good guys going to get them. We provide the air. And the ground pounders, they treating you right?" Kestrel hesitated. Yuma had been on her crew since she'd taken command of the aircraft, and he had a way of reading situations. "They're SEALs. They trust their team. But not you." "Not yet," Yuma spat into the sand. "Their loss. I've seen you bring this bird back with holes I could put my fist through. I've seen you put ordnance through windows at night in weather that grounded everyone else. They want to judge you on anything other than your record. That's their problem. That's what I keep telling myself, Chief." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That tattoo. I've seen it before, you know. Long time ago on another pilot. Different unit, different war. But the same design." Kestrel went very still. "Where? Classified operations. The kind that don't make it into official records. The kind where the people involved don't exist on paper." He tapped the side of his nose. "That's all I'm saying. But maybe, just maybe, those SEALs are judging a book they can't even read." He went back to his checklist before she could respond. Kestrel stood there in the dying light, watching the shadows lengthen across the flight line, and wondered how many other people had recognized the significance of the ink on her arm and simply never said anything. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute when Kestrel climbed into the cockpit at 0330. The ground crew had everything ready, weapons armed, systems checked. She ran through her own pre-flight with methodical precision, each switch and gauge a familiar friend. The A-10's cockpit was cramped and utilitarian, designed for function over comfort. She strapped in, connected her G-suit and oxygen mask, powered up the systems. The twin General Electric turbofans spooled up with their characteristic whistle, and she felt the aircraft come alive beneath her. Radio checks came through clean. Weather was clear, winds minimal. Intelligence reported no changes to the threat assessment. She taxied to the runway, the Warthog's nose gear steering requiring constant attention. At 0400 exactly, Tower cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttles and felt the familiar acceleration, the rumble of tires on concrete, then the smooth transition to flight. The A-10 climbed slowly, heavily laden with ordnance. She set course northwest toward the mountains, leveling at 15,000 feet. The desert spread below her in shades of black and gray, dotted with occasional lights from remote villages. She checked her fuel state, weapons status, communication suite. Everything nominal. The SEALs would be loading into their helicopters now, going through their own rituals. Commander Morrison would be reviewing the mission plan one final time. The staff sergeant who'd mocked her tattoo would be checking his rifle, his grenades, his medical kit. They were professionals, whatever else they might be. She had to trust they'd do their jobs, and they had to trust she'd do hers. The mountains appeared on the horizon as the sky began to lighten, massive shadows against the growing dawn. Kestrel descended to 12,000 feet and began her orbit pattern 5 miles from the target compound. Her radar warning receiver stayed quiet. Down below, somewhere in that darkness, the helicopters were making their approach. "Ironside ground, this is Hog 731 on station and ready." Morrison's voice came back, calm and professional. "Copy, Hog. We're 10 minutes out. Maintain current position." 10 minutes in a combat orbit felt like hours. Kestrel scanned her instruments, checked her targeting pod, verified her weapons one more time. The sun was just beginning to touch the mountain peaks, painting them gold and orange. Beautiful country for ugly business. She thought about the tattoo, about the conversation with Yuma, about all the times people had seen it and not understood what they were looking at. The design wasn't random. Every element meant something specific, carried weight and history. The wings represented her qualification, yes, but also a promise she'd made. The sword represented a debt she'd paid. The letters woven through it were names. Not many people knew how to read military insignia that never officially existed. Hog 731, Ironside ground. We're 3 minutes out. Enemy activity looks light. We may not need you. Kestrel copied the transmission, feeling equal parts relief and disappointment. Relief that the mission might go cleanly. Disappointment that she wouldn't get to prove herself to men who'd already decided she didn't measure up. She maintained her orbit, watching the thermal imaging from her targeting pod. The compound was barely visible in the pre-dawn gray, a cluster of buildings around a central courtyard. Intel said 12 to 15 hostiles plus the high-value target. The SEALs would hit fast and hard, hopping to be in and out before effective resistance could form. Then everything changed. Hog Ironside, contact. Heavy contact. We're taking fire from multiple positions. Building 3 has a technical with a 50 cal. Morrison's voice had changed, lost its calm. Now it carried urgency and controlled violence. Kestrel was already rolling in before he finished transmitting. She pushed the throttles forward, dropped the nose, and dove toward the compound. The targeting pod slaved to her helmet display, showing her exactly what Morrison was talking about. A truck-mounted machine gun was tracking the SEAL positions, tracers cutting through the morning like angry fireflies. Ironside, Hog is in hot. Confirm Building 3, truck-mounted weapon north side of compound. Confirmed, we've got wounded. We need that gun silenced now. The distance closed rapidly. Kestrel's training took over, years of muscle memory and calculated aggression. She armed a single Maverick missile, locked the targeting seeker onto the heat signature of the truck, and waited for tone. The missile seeker growled in her headset, then locked solid. Rifle, she called and pressed the release. The AGM-65 dropped from its rail and ignited, streaking downward on a pillar of flame. 5 seconds later, the truck exploded in a ball of orange fire. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off. Kestrel pulled up hard, climbing back to altitude. Below, the SEALs were moving again, advancing through the compound. Morrison's voice came through, still strained but functional. Good hit, Hog. Stand by for follow-up tasking. She resumed her orbit higher now, scanning for additional threats. The compound was coming alive, figures running between buildings, muzzle flashes appearing from windows and rooftops. The SEALs were outnumbered but moving with practiced efficiency, room to room, eliminating resistance. Hog Ironside, Building 5, east side. Multiple shooters on the roof. We can't advance. Kestrel rolled in again, this time selecting her 30mm cannon. She lined up on Building 5, adjusted for wind and ballistics, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared to life, the entire aircraft shuddering as 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium tore downward. The sound was distinctive, a deep tearing noise like the world's angriest chainsaw. The roof of Building 5 disintegrated. Concrete bodies and weapons flew in all directions. She walked the cannon fire across the structure in a 2-second burst, then pulled up and banked left. Building 5 is clear, moving to objective. Morrison sounded better now, back in control. The mission was working. Kestrel had just proven what the A-10 could do, what she could do. But the battle wasn't over. Her radar warning receiver suddenly screamed. Someone had locked her up with a surface-to-air missile system. She deployed chaff and flares, broke hard right, and dove for the deck. The missile tracked her for 3 seconds, then lost lock and detonated harmlessly 1,000 feet away. Ironside, Hog, I've got SAM activity. Someone down there has more than small arms. Morrison cursed over the radio. Intel said light resistance. Can you locate the launcher? Kestrel was already searching, her targeting pod scanning the surrounding area. There, 200 meters south of the compound, partially hidden in a grove of trees, a vehicle with distinctive rectangular launchers. I have eyes on. Looks like a man-portable system mounted on a technical. Permission to engage. Granted, take it out. She armed another Maverick, locked onto the vehicle, and fired. The missile guided true, and the SAM launcher vanished in a fireball. No more radar warnings. Kestrel climbed back to altitude and resumed her orbit. The compound was mostly secure now. The SEALs had reached the central building and were preparing to breach. This was the critical moment, the reason for the entire operation. The high-value target was inside that building, and the next 60 seconds would determine mission success or failure. Hog, Ironside, we're going in. Cover our exfil route. Copy, I've got you. Kestrel positioned herself to provide maximum coverage. She had 4 Mavericks left, a full load of 30mm ammunition, and enough fuel for 2 more hours. Whatever happened next, she'd be ready. The sun had fully risen now, flooding the valley with harsh morning light. She could see everything clearly, the destroyed vehicles, the bodies, the SEALs moving with purpose through the compound. Commander Morrison led from the front, his team stacked behind him. They breached the door with explosive charges and disappeared inside. 30 seconds passed, then 60. Kestrel's fingers hovered over her weapon's controls, waiting. Morrison's voice finally came through, and this time she heard something new in it, not stress, not urgency, something closer to shock. Hog, Ironside, we have the package, moving to exfil now, but I need you on the ground immediately. Kestrel blinked. Say again, Ironside, you want me to land? Affirmative. There's something you need to see. Something about your tattoo. The cold feeling from yesterday's briefing returned, stronger now. Ironside, I'm not equipped for ground ops. I'm your air cover. I understand that, Major, but there's someone here who knows you, or knows about you, and I need to understand what the hell is going on before we extract. Kestrel's mind raced. The mission was compromised by personal business. That violated every protocol. But Morrison wasn't the type to make frivolous requests, especially not in a hot zone. She scanned the area one more time, confirming no immediate threats. The nearest enemy reinforcements were at least 20 minutes out according to intelligence. The compound had a road that ran north to south, straight enough and wide enough to serve as an improvised runway. She'd landed on worse. Ironside, Hog. I'm coming down, but if this is anything other than mission critical, I'm filing a complaint that will reach the Pentagon. Understood. We'll mark the landing zone with smoke. Green smoke began pouring from canisters at the north end of the road. Kestrel lined up her approach, dropped her landing gear, and brought the A-10 in low and fast. The Warthog wasn't designed for short field landings, but it was designed for rough ones. She touched down hard, reverse thrust, and brought the aircraft to a stop with 50 meters to spare. Morrison and 2 other SEALs were running toward her, weapons at the ready. She could see the tension in their body language, the way they kept checking their surroundings. This wasn't a secure area. Every second on the ground increased their risk. She popped the canopy and started to climb out, but Morrison waved her back. Stay in the cockpit, Major. We're bringing him to you. Him? The high-value target. Kestrel kept her hand near her sidearm, not sure what to expect. 2 more SEALs emerged from the central building, escorting a man between them. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a weathered face. He wore civilian clothes but moved with military bearing. As they got closer, Kestrel could see his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanning everything. He looked up at her in the cockpit and his expression changed. Recognition, or something like it. Morrison climbed up onto the wing, bringing them face to face. His expression was unreadable. Major Vance, this is Dr. Elias Cove. He's a defense contractor, embedded with enemy forces as part of deep cover operations. His extraction was our primary objective. Kestrel nodded, still confused about why this required her to land. Morrison continued, his voice dropping lower. Dr. Cove has been in place for 3 years, gathering intelligence on weapons development and command structures. When we secured him, he saw one of my men checking your aircraft number. He asked specifically about the pilot of Tail 731, and then he asked about a tattoo. The cold feeling intensified. Kestrel looked past Morrison to the man on the ground. Dr. Cove was staring at her with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. I need to see your right forearm, Morrison said. The full tattoo. Kestrel hesitated, but Morrison's expression made it clear this wasn't optional. She unzipped her flight suit sleeve and pushed it up, revealing the complete design. The wings, the sword, the interwoven letters. Morrison studied it for several seconds, then turned to Dr. Cove. Is this what you're talking about? Cove stepped closer, his escort moving with him. He reached up toward the wing, not quite touching but close enough to see clearly. When he spoke, his voice was rough, unused to extended conversation. I designed that Insignia 18 years ago. For a unit that officially never existed, Operation Meridian. Black budget, deep cover, no paper trail. 24 pilots flying missions that would be denied by 3 different administrations if they ever came to light. He paused, his eyes never leaving the tattoo. Every pilot who completed the program was authorized to carry that insignia, but not as a patch or a pin. Those could be lost, stolen, copied. We marked ourselves, permanent. So we'd always know each other, no matter how much time passed or how deep the classification went. Morrison's face had gone carefully neutral, the expression of a man processing information that changed his entire understanding of a situation. Major Vance, were you part of Operation Meridian? Kestrel felt the weight of 18 years pressing down on her, the missions she couldn't talk about, the places she'd been that didn't exist on maps, the people she'd lost whose names would never appear on any memorial. Yes, sir, I was. And this tattoo, this insignia that my men laughed at yesterday, this represents authorization from the highest levels of Special Operations Command, Dr. Cove interrupted, to conduct air support missions in denied territory, without backup, without rescue, without official acknowledgement. The pilots of Meridian had a 92% survival rate over 4 years of operations. That's better than any comparable program before or since. He looked directly at Morrison now. Every person who carries that mark earned it by flying into situations that should have killed them and somehow making it back, repeatedly. The program was dissolved in 2019, but the authorization remains valid, permanently classified, permanently recognized by those who know. Morrison's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he turned to Kestrel with an expression she'd never seen before on his face. Respect. Pure, unfiltered respect. Major, I owe you an apology. My team owes you an apology. We made assumptions based on insufficient information. It's classified, sir. You couldn't have known. That's not an excuse for disrespect. He climbed down from the wing and gestured to his team. Spread out, maintain security. The Major and Dr. Cove need a moment. Cove stepped closer as the SEALs moved to defensive positions. Up close, Kestrel could see the toll 3 years of deep cover had taken on him, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. What aircraft did you fly in Meridian? He asked quietly. MH-6 Little Birds mostly, some specialized variants that never made it to production. Night insertions, hot extractions, both, plus forward air control for units that weren't supposed to be where they were. Cove smiled and it transformed his face. I remember your call sign now. Wraith. Because you'd appear out of nowhere, deliver exactly what was needed, and vanish before anyone could confirm you were real. Kestrel felt something unlock in her chest, some pressure she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Someone remembered, someone knew. That's right. The sword in your tattoo, that's for Syria, isn't it? The rescue operation in Aleppo. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I was read into that mission, Cove said softly. What you did that night saved 16 operators and 3 civilians. The after-action report called it impossible. Said no pilot could have flown that pattern in that weather with that much ground fire and lived. I had good training, and a lot of luck. No such thing as luck in our line of work, Major, just skill and will. He reached out and gently touched the edge of the tattoo, his finger tracing the letters woven through the design. These names. I recognize some of them, Meridian pilots who didn't make it back. All of them, Kestrel confirmed. 24 of us went in, 22 came out. These are the 2 who didn't. Sawyer and Chen. Yes, sir, Cove's hand dropped. I designed this insignia to be recognized only by those who needed to know. I never expected it to mark someone like this, to carry the memory of loss so visibly. I'm sorry. Don't be. They earned their place here. I carry them with me on every mission. Morrison was climbing back up onto the wing, his radio crackling. Major, we need to move. Enemy reinforcements are closer than expected. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this valley gets very unfriendly. Kestrel was already strapping back in, going through her startup checklist. Get your people loaded, Commander. I'll be overhead in 90 seconds. Morrison paused before climbing down. Major, when we get back to base, I'm going to have a conversation with my team about respect, about assumptions, about understanding that some people have earned things we can't see. That's not necessary, sir. Yes, it is, because I run a professional unit and professionals know when they've screwed up. He dropped to the ground and started directing his team toward the waiting helicopters. Dr. Cove lingered for a moment longer. Wraith, it's been an honor. Maybe when all this is declassified in another 50 years, someone will write the real story of Meridian. Until then, fly safe. You too, Doctor, and welcome home. The canopy closed. Kestrel ran through her checks with practiced speed, started her engines, and taxied to position. The SEALs were loading into their helicopters at the compound's edge. Enemy vehicles were visible now on the southern road, closing fast. She advanced the throttles and accelerated down the makeshift runway. The A-10 lifted off with less than 20 meters to spare, climbing into the morning sky. Below, the helicopters lifted off simultaneously, carrying Morrison's team and their precious cargo toward safety. Kestrel resumed her overwatch position, but now she could hear the change in radio traffic. Morrison was talking to his team, his words measured and deliberate. Listen up, Ironside. What happened at that compound stays classified, but I'm going to tell you this much. The pilot providing our air support today isn't just qualified. She's one of the most decorated special operations aviators still flying. Her record is sealed, her missions are classified, and every single one of us owes her an apology for judging what we didn't understand. There was silence on the net for a moment. Then the staff sergeant who'd mocked her tattoo came on. Hog 731, Ironside 21, I need to say something. Kestrel keyed her mic. Go ahead, 21. I was wrong, ma'am, completely wrong. I judged you on surface bullshit instead of capability. That's unprofessional and I'm sorry. Apology accepted, 2-1. Let's get you home safe. The flight back to base was uneventful. Kestrel maintained position above the helicopters, scanning for threats that never materialized. Her fuel state was good, her systems were green, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something approaching satisfaction. Not because she'd been vindicated, not because people finally understood, but because she'd done the job exactly as she'd been trained to do it, and in doing so, she'd honored the memory of the pilots who never made it home. When she finally landed and shut down her aircraft, Technical Sergeant Yuma was waiting with his usual efficiency, but his expression was different, knowing. Good mission, Major. Successful extraction, no friendly casualties, mission complete. Yes, good mission. I heard some interesting radio traffic. Word travels fast on flight lines. Kestrel climbed down from the cockpit, feeling the fatigue of 4 hours in the seat. What word would that be, Chief? That maybe the pilot of 731 has been carrying around credentials that most flag officers don't have clearance to know about. That maybe some SEALs learned a valuable lesson about respecting people they don't understand. Chief, you know better than to repeat classified information. I know better than to repeat information that's classified, ma'am. What I heard wasn't classified. Just educational. He walked around the aircraft, inspecting for damage. 2 bullet holes in the left horizontal stabilizer, 1 in the port engine cowling, nothing structural. We'll have you patched and ready by tomorrow. The A-10 takes a beating and keeps flying. Like its pilot, Yuma said quietly. He handed her a tablet with the maintenance report. There's a message for you from Commander Morrison. He wants to see you in his office at 1400 hours. Kestrel checked her watch. 3 hours. Enough time to debrief, shower, and prepare for whatever conversation was coming. She headed for the operations building, her flight suit still damp with sweat, her mind still processing everything that had happened. Dr. Cove's recognition, Morrison's apology, the feeling of being seen, really seen for who she was rather than who people assumed her to be. The operations officer caught her in the hallway. Major Vance, good mission by all accounts. Commander Morrison wants you to know the package is secure and already en route to further debriefing. Your role in the extraction is being noted in official reports. Thank you, sir. Also, there's a personnel request that came through. Morrison wants you attached to his unit for the duration of their deployment, specifically requested you. He says, and I quote, I want the best close air support available, and Major Vance has proven she's exactly that. Kestrel felt something shift in her chest. Validation from someone who mattered, who understood the costs and stakes of their profession. I'm honored. If command approves, I'd be willing. Consider it approved. You're officially attached to SEAL Team 7 for the next 6 months. She showered and changed into a fresh uniform, then spent an hour writing her after-action report. The words came easily now, factual and precise. Times, locations, ordnance expended, results achieved. The report would be read by analysts and commanders who would never know the full context, who would see only the surface of what had happened. But somewhere, in a database so classified that most people didn't know it existed, there would be a fuller accounting. A record of Operation Meridian pilots still flying, still serving, still carrying the weight of missions that officially never happened. At 13:50, she knocked on Commander Morrison's door. His voice called out, "Enter." The office was spare and functional, maps on the walls, a desk covered in mission plans and intelligence reports. Morrison stood by the window looking out at the flight line. He turned when she entered and gestured to a chair. "Sit, Major. We need to talk." Kestrel sat, keeping her posture military correct. Morrison settled into his own chair and studied her for a long moment. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, he began. "I've worked with every branch, every special operations unit, pilots from a dozen different countries. I thought I'd seen everything, understood how the system worked. Today taught me I was wrong. Sir, you were operating with the information available." "Let me finish, Major. I was wrong not just about you, but about how I assess people. I let my team develop a culture where assumptions based on appearance, on gender, on things that don't matter went unchallenged. That stops now." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Dr. Cove gave me a phone number before we handed him off to the intelligence people. He said if I ever wanted to understand what Operation Meridian really was, I should call it. So I did." Kestrel went very still. Morrison continued. "I spoke with a colonel whose name I can't repeat. He told me things I can't share. But I can tell you this. In the entire history of American military aviation, fewer than 50 pilots have been cleared for the level of operations you conducted. The missions you flew had zero margin for error, zero support, and consequences that could have sparked international incidents or worse. He told me that the psychological screening for Meridian was more rigorous than astronaut selection, that the washout rate was 90%, and that every single pilot who completed the program was capable of things most people would consider impossible." Morrison paused, letting that sink in. "He also told me that most Meridian pilots retired within a year of the program ending. Too much stress, too many classified ghosts, too hard to go back to regular operations. But a few stayed in service, flying regular missions with regular units, never mentioning what they'd done because they literally weren't allowed to." "That's accurate, sir. Why? Why keep flying when you could retire with honors, move on to civilian work, leave the stress behind?" Kestrel had asked herself that question 1,000 times. The answer never changed. "Because I'm good at it, sir, and because the work matters. Every pilot I lost in Meridian, every friend who didn't come home, they believed in the mission. They believed that what we did made a difference, saved lives, prevented worse outcomes. I owe it to them to keep doing the work." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say. That's why I requested you for my team. Not because of your past, but because of who you are right now. A pilot who shows up, does the job, and doesn't need recognition or glory. We need more of that. I appreciate the assignment, sir. There's one more thing." Morrison opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder. "This is technically above my pay grade, but the colonel I spoke with authorized me to show you. It's a summary of how many operations have been directly or indirectly affected by Meridian intelligence over the last 5 years. Missions that succeeded because you and your fellow pilots gathered information in places we couldn't otherwise access." He slid the folder across the desk. Kestrel opened it and scanned the contents. The list was longer than she'd expected. Operations across 3 continents. Hostage rescues, counterterrorism strikes, strategic eliminations. Everyone marked with annotations about intelligence sources that had made the missions possible. Some of those sources were her. Information she'd gathered on flights that officially never happened, using sensors and observation techniques that most pilots never learned. The work hadn't ended when Meridian dissolved. It had just changed form, became part of the broader intelligence apparatus that kept operations running. 18 operations in 5 years, Morrison said quietly. Hundreds of lives saved, multiple strategic objectives achieved, all because Meridian pilots stayed in the system and kept feeding high-quality intelligence into the network. Dr. Cove is one recipient of that intelligence. The missions he influenced, the weapons programs he helped us understand, they succeeded partly because of information you provided. Kestrel closed the folder, not trusting herself to speak. Morrison stood and walked to the window again. I need you to understand something, Major. This morning before the mission I saw you as a box to check, an asset assigned to my unit that I had to work with. After today I see you as something else, a force multiplier, someone whose presence makes my entire team better, and I'm going to make damn sure every person under my command understands that. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, just keep doing what you do. And maybe, when this deployment is over and the next generation of pilots is coming up, consider teaching. Because everything you know, everything you learned in Meridian and after, that's knowledge we can't afford to lose. He turned back to face her. Dismissed, Major. Get some rest. We have another mission briefing at 0600 tomorrow. Kestrel stood, saluted, and left the office. As she walked back across the base toward her quarters, she felt the desert heat pressing down, the weight of 18 years of service, the memory of friends lost and missions flown. But she also felt something else. Purpose. The certainty that what she did mattered, that the sacrifices made sense, that the path forward was clear. That evening, after the sun had set and the base had settled into its nighttime routine, Kestrel sat outside her quarters and looked up at the stars. The same stars that had guided her through night missions in Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and a dozen other places she'd never be allowed to officially name. The same stars that Sawyer and Chen had flown under before their luck ran out. She pulled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo in the faint light from the building behind her. The wings still looked sharp, the sword still looked purposeful, the names still carried their weight. Someone sat down beside her and she looked over to see the staff sergeant from Morrison's team, the one who'd mocked her yesterday. He had 2 bottles of water and offered her one. "Major," he said simply. "Sergeant." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 warriors who understood that some things didn't need words. "I did some asking around," he finally said. "Talk to people who have been in longer than me, who remember things. Operation Meridian is like a ghost story in special operations circles. People whisper about it, but nobody confirms anything. They say the pilots who flew those missions were more myth than real." "We were real," Kestrel said quietly. "I believe that now, and I'm sorry I didn't yesterday. Water under the bridge, Sergeant. We all make mistakes." "Yeah, but this one bothered me. I've spent 15 years in special operations. I know better than to judge people on surface crap, but I did it anyway, and that means I let my standards slip. I wanted you to know I'm not making that mistake again." He stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. My daughter is 8 years old. She wants to be a pilot. I've been telling her it's hard, that she'll have to be twice as good as everyone else, that people will doubt her. After today, I'm going to tell her something else. I'm going to tell her that the best pilots don't need anyone's permission to be excellent. They just are." Kestrel felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. "That's good advice, Sergeant." "Yeah, I should have learned it sooner." He walked away into the darkness, leaving Kestrel alone with the stars and her thoughts. She thought about Morrison's words about teaching the next generation. Maybe that was the path forward. Maybe the real legacy of Meridian wasn't the missions they flew, but the knowledge they could pass on. The understanding that excellence didn't require recognition, that service didn't need glory, that the hardest work often happened in silence. She pulled out her phone and opened a message to Technical Sergeant Yuma. "Chief, hypothetical question. If someone wanted to document best practices for close air support in denied territory, what would be the best format? Written manual, video instruction, both?" His response came back quickly. "Both plus hands-on training, but why hypothetical? You thinking about writing this up?" "Maybe. Morrison suggested teaching after this deployment. I'm considering it." "About damn time, Major. Everything you know is in your head and nowhere else. When you retire, all that knowledge walks out the door. Document it, teach it. Make sure the next generation doesn't have to relearn everything from scratch. Kestrel smiled in the darkness. Yuma was right, as usual. The missions mattered, but so did the legacy. So did making sure that future pilots, male and female, understood what was possible if they had the skill and the will. She put her phone away and stood, stretching muscles stiff from the day's flying. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that the lessons of Meridian still applied. But tonight she could rest knowing that the work continued, that the memory of lost friends was honored through action rather than words, and that somewhere out there, an 8-year-old girl dreamed of flying while her father learned to believe it was possible. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Kestrel watched them for another moment, then headed inside. There was always another mission coming, always another briefing, another takeoff, another chance to get it right. That was the life she'd chosen 18 years ago, and despite everything, despite the cost and the classification and the constant burden of proof, she wouldn't choose differently. Because some people were called to fly, and some people were called to fly into the darkness and bring others home. That was the real meaning of the insignia on her arm. Not authorization, not recognition, purpose. Dawn came early, as it always did on the base. Kestrel was awake before the alarm, already running through the day's mission parameters in her mind. The briefing at 0600 would cover a reconnaissance flight along the border region, gathering intelligence on enemy movements and supply routes. Standard work, but important. Morrison's team would be inserted into a mountain observation post, and she'd provide overwatch while they established their position. By the time she reached the briefing room, word had spread. The entire SEAL team was there early, and the atmosphere had changed completely. Men nodded as she entered. The staff sergeant stood and gestured to a seat he'd saved in the front row. Commander Morrison was already at the podium, reviewing his notes. When everyone was settled, he began without preamble. Gentlemen, today's mission is reconnaissance and surveillance. Ground element will establish an observation post at grid November 7-3. Major Vance will provide air cover and assist with identification of high-value targets. We expect this to be a quiet insertion, but as yesterday proved, expectations and reality don't always align. He clicked to the tactical map. Our area of operations has seen increased enemy activity over the past 72 hours. Intelligence suggests a major supply convoy may be moving through the valley within the next 48 hours. If we can confirm that convoy's route and timing, we can interdict it before it reaches enemy forces in the south. The briefing continued with logistics, communications plans, and contingency procedures. Kestrel absorbed every detail, making mental notes about terrain features, emergency landing zones, and potential threats. When Morrison opened the floor for questions, the team's queries were professional and focused. No more jokes, no more skepticism. Just operators doing their job. After the briefing, Morrison pulled her aside. Major, I want you to know that Dr. Cove reached his final destination safely. The intelligence he carried is already being processed. He specifically asked me to pass along his thanks for your role in the extraction. Glad to hear it, sir. He also said something else. He said that Meridian pilots were taught to trust their instincts above their instruments, their judgment above their orders. That the program succeeded because it gave extraordinary people the authority to make split-second decisions in impossible situations. Morrison's expression was thoughtful. I'm giving you that same authority on this deployment. If you see something that needs to be addressed, if your instincts tell you the situation is different than what we think, I want you to act. Don't wait for my approval. You have the experience and the judgment. Use them. It was the kind of trust that most pilots never received, the acknowledgement that she didn't need to be micromanaged or second-guessed. I appreciate that, sir. I won't abuse it. I know you won't. That's why I'm offering it. The flight to the insertion point was smooth. Kestrel took off at 0700, climbed to altitude, and set course for the mountains. Below, the desert gave way to foothills, then to the rugged peaks that marked the border region. The morning light painted everything in shades of gold and shadow, beautiful and desolate. Morrison's team inserted via helicopter at 0830, rappelling down to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley. Kestrel watched from above as they established their position, setting up observation equipment and concealment. They moved with practiced efficiency, and within 15 minutes they'd essentially disappeared into the landscape. Hog 731 Ironside were set, beginning surveillance sweep. Copy Ironside. I'll maintain position overhead. Call if you need anything. Kestrel settled into the rhythm of reconnaissance flying. Slow orbits at 15,000 feet, scanning the valley below with her targeting pod. She recorded video of roads, buildings, and vehicle movements. Every piece of data would be analyzed back at base, looking for patterns and anomalies. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Kestrel monitored her fuel state, coordinated with a tanker for mid-air refueling, and continued her surveillance. Morrison's team checked in every 30 minutes with updates that were mostly variations of nothing significant. It was the kind of mission that required patience and attention to detail, where success meant gathering information rather than dropping bombs. Then, at 11:43, everything changed. Hog Ironside, we've got movement. Multiple vehicles entering the valley from the north. Count is 15. No, 20 vehicles, mixed civilian and military. Kestrel was already adjusting her targeting pod, zooming in on the convoy Morrison had spotted. He was right. A long line of trucks was winding through the mountain roads, heading south. Some were clearly military, with mounted weapons and uniformed personnel. Others looked civilian but moved with the same disciplined spacing. Ironside, Hog confirms visual. 20-plus vehicles, mixed composition. Looks like they're using civilian trucks to blend in. Can you identify cargo? Kestrel increased magnification, studying individual trucks. Most had covered beds that concealed their contents, but one truck near the middle of the convoy had its covering partially loose and she could see inside. Ironside, I'm seeing what looks like weapons crates. Large caliber, probably mortars or anti-aircraft systems. This isn't a supply convoy. This is a major weapons shipment. Morrison's voice tightened. Copy. Transmitting video feed to higher headquarters. Stand by. Kestrel continued recording, tracking the convoy's progress. They were moving slowly, cautious of the rough roads. At their current speed, they'd be through the valley and into more populated areas within 2 hours. Once there, striking them would be nearly impossible without massive civilian casualties. Her instincts, honed by years of Meridian operations, were screaming that this was the opportunity. The convoy was exposed in open terrain, far from civilians. If they were going to stop this weapons shipment, it had to be now. Morrison came back on the radio. Hog Higher Headquarters confirms this is a priority target. We have authorization to engage, but there's a complication. Intelligence suggests one of the vehicles may be carrying a high-value enemy commander. If possible, we need to disable the convoy without destroying everything. Give ourselves the chance for a ground interdiction. Kestrel's mind raced through options. 20-plus vehicles spread over a mile of road. She had 4 Mavericks left, Mark 82 bombs and her 30mm cannon. Not enough to destroy the entire convoy, but maybe enough to trap it. Ironside, if I take out the lead and rear vehicles, I can box them in. Your team would need to move fast to secure the commander before they scatter into the mountains. We can be there in 15 minutes. Do it. Kestrel rolled in, selecting 2 Mavericks. She locked onto the lead vehicle, a military truck with a mounted machine gun, and fired. The missile streaked down and obliterated the truck, sending debris across the road. She immediately locked onto the last vehicle in the convoy and fired again. Another explosion, another blocked route. The convoy was trapped. Vehicles stopped, personnel began scrambling out, some taking defensive positions while others tried to clear the debris. Kestrel circled, watching for anyone who tried to flee. Several trucks attempted to turn around, but the mountain roads were too narrow. They were stuck. Ironside, convoy is immobilized. I count approximately 60 personnel, mixed armed and unarmed. No civilians visible. Copy. We're moving in. Maintain overwatch and engage any hostile fire. Morrison's team moved with impressive speed, covering the distance from their observation post to the convoy in just under 12 minutes. Kestrel watched them approach from multiple angles, using terrain to their advantage. When they were within 200 meters, someone in the convoy spotted them and opened fire. Hog taking fire. South side of convoy. I need that position suppressed. Kestrel had already identified the shooter, a man with an AK-47 using a truck for cover. She lined up her 30-millimeter cannon and fired a short burst. The truck and the shooter disappeared in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The message was clear. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. Most of the convoy personnel dropped their weapons and raised their hands. A few tried to run into the mountains, but Morrison's team cut them off. Within 5 minutes, the situation was under control. Kestrel continued her orbit, scanning for reinforcements or additional threats. The valley remained quiet except for the smoking wreckage of the 2 vehicles she destroyed. Hog Ironside. We have the site secured. We've identified the high-value target. He's alive and in custody, requesting immediate extraction for both our team and prisoners. Copy Ironside. I'll coordinate with the extraction birds. Kestrel switched frequencies and contacted the helicopter unit waiting at a forward staging area. Within minutes, they were airborne and heading toward the convoy site. She provided navigation guidance, ensuring they approached from a safe vector. The extraction went smoothly. Morrison's team loaded their captured commander and gathered intelligence materials from the convoy vehicles. The remaining enemy personnel were flexcuffed and prepared for transport. By 1300 hours, everyone was airborne and heading back to base, leaving the damaged convoy behind for follow-up forces to process. Hog Ironside, outstanding work today. That weapons shipment would have caused significant casualties if it had reached its destination. You potentially saved a lot of lives. Just doing the job, Commander. No, Major. You did more than the job. When you spotted that weapons cargo, you could have waited for higher headquarters to make the call. But you trusted your judgment and gave us the information we needed to act. That's the difference between competent and exceptional. Kestrel didn't respond, but she felt the words settle somewhere deep. Recognition from someone who understood the work, who appreciated the constant balance between following protocol and trusting instinct. The flight back to base gave her time to think. The mission had been successful by any measure, but success in combat always carried weight. People had died today, even if they were enemy combatants. Trucks had been destroyed. Families would receive news that someone wasn't coming home. That weight never got lighter, no matter how necessary the mission. She thought about Sawyer and Chen, the 2 pilots whose names were woven into her tattoo. They'd understood this weight, carried it every day they flew. Sawyer had been killed when his helicopter took ground fire during an extraction in Somalia. Chen had died when her aircraft suffered mechanical failure over the Mediterranean. Both losses had been classified, their contributions never publicly acknowledged, but their families knew. Their friends knew, and every time Kestrel looked at her arm, she knew. That's what service meant. Not glory or recognition, but the quiet certainty that the work mattered, that lives were saved, that evil was confronted. The rest was just noise. She landed at 1500 hours, shut down her systems, and climbed out to find Technical Sergeant Yuma waiting with his usual efficiency. Major, I heard good things on the radio. Successful interdiction, high-value capture, no friendly casualties. That's a good day's work. It was a team effort, Chief. Everything in this job is a team effort, ma'am, but some team members contribute more than others. He began his post-flight inspection while Kestrel headed to debriefing. The operations officer wanted a detailed account of everything she'd observed, every decision she'd made. She spent 2 hours walking through the mission, reviewing video footage, answering questions about target identification and rules of engagement. When she finally emerged, exhausted and ready for food, she found Commander Morrison waiting in the hallway. Major, walk with me. They headed toward the mess hall, Morrison setting a casual pace. I wanted you to hear this before it goes through official channels. The high-value target you helped us capture today has already provided significant intelligence. Names, locations, planned operations. This is the kind of breakthrough that shifts the entire campaign. That's excellent news, sir. It gets better. Higher headquarters is so pleased with the results that they're expanding our operational mandate. We're being tasked with a series of disruption missions over the next month, and they specifically requested that you remain attached to our unit for all of them. Kestrel processed this. A month of combat operations with a SEAL team providing close air support for high-value missions. It was exactly the kind of work she excelled at, the kind that made use of every skill she developed in Meridian and after. I'm honored, sir, and ready. Morrison stopped and turned to face her. There's something else you should know. I've been authorized to read you into some current operations that require specialized skills, the kind of skills that Meridian pilots developed. Off-book insertions, intelligence gathering in denied territory, support for operations that won't appear in official records. The familiar territory of classified work. Kestrel had thought those days were behind her. Apparently not. You say off-book, sir. How far off-book are we talking? The kind where mission reports are filed in systems that 99% of the military doesn't know exist. The kind where if something goes wrong, official response will be limited. The kind where we need pilots who can operate independently, make command decisions, and live with the consequences. I understand. I'm in. Morrison smiled, and it was genuine. I thought you'd say that. Briefing is at 2000 hours. Bring your helmet. We might be wheels up tonight. The rest of the afternoon passed in preparation. Kestrel checked her gear, reviewed intelligence reports, and grabbed a quick meal. At 1900 hours, she returned to her aircraft to personally supervise the weapons loading. Yuma had already anticipated her needs, configuring the A-10 for maximum flexibility with a mix of precision weapons and area suppression ordnance. Chief, you're reading my mind again. Just doing my job, ma'am. But I notice you're loading for something more complicated than standard close air support. This one of those missions that doesn't go in the regular log books. Can't say, Chief. Don't have to. I've been doing this long enough to recognize the pattern. Just bring my aircraft back in one piece. Always do. The 2000 hours briefing was smaller than usual. Just Morrison, his top 4 operators, and Kestrel. The room was swept for bugs, phones were collected at the door, and the mission brief was delivered from memory rather than slides. Gentlemen, Major, Morrison began. What I'm about to describe is classified at a level that requires special acknowledgement. By remaining in this room, you're agreeing to compartmentalize security protocols. Understood, everyone nodded. Morrison continued. We've identified a meeting taking place tomorrow night at a compound in the mountains, 40 kilometers inside hostile territory. 3 senior enemy commanders will be present, including the operational leader for the entire northern region. This represents a once-in-a-year opportunity to decapitate their leadership structure. He paused, letting that sink in. The challenge is the location. It's in a valley surrounded by air defense systems. Conventional approach is suicide. Helicopter insertion puts us at extreme risk, but there's one approach vector that might work. Morrison looked directly at Kestrel. A low-level flight through a canyon system, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection. It requires precise navigation, night flying in mountain terrain, and the ability to hit a target with zero margin for error. Intelligence says it's possible, but only for a pilot with exceptional skill and nerves. Kestrel studied the map he'd unfolded on the table. The canyon system was narrow and winding, with walls rising 1,000 feet on either side. She'd flown similar profiles in Meridian, threading through mountain passes in Afghanistan and Yemen. But this was tighter, more technical. What's the target package, sir? We need one building destroyed precisely. Adjacent structures cannot be damaged because they house civilian families. We need the strike to happen at exactly 2200 hours local time, when our intelligence confirms all 3 commanders will be present. Time over target accuracy to the minute, precision strike with no collateral damage, in a defended valley using terrain masking approach. Kestrel calculated the difficulty. That's challenging but doable. I'll need detailed terrain maps, current weather forecasts, and radio frequencies for extraction support. You'll have all of that. What else? I need to fly the route in daylight tomorrow at altitude to familiarize myself with landmarks and navigation points. Then I'll fly it at night low-level for the actual mission. 2 flights back-to-back. Morrison nodded. Approved. Anything else? Kestrel looked at each of the operators in turn. These were men who trusted their commander, which meant they'd accepted his assessment of her capabilities. but this mission would require perfect coordination. If something goes wrong, if I'm delayed or the strike can't happen at 2200, do we have a backup plan? Negative. This is a one-shot opportunity. If we miss it, the commanders will relocate and we won't get another chance. High stakes, single attempt, no backup. The parameters that had defined most Meridian missions. Then I'll make sure we don't miss it. The briefing continued with details about communication protocols, emergency procedures, and extraction plans if she had to eject in hostile territory. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. Wheels up for the reconnaissance flight was scheduled for 0800, giving her just enough time for a few hours of sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, running through the mission profile in her mind. The canyon approach would require flying at high speed, barely 50 feet above the deck, making constant course corrections to follow the terrain. At night, in hostile territory, with air defenses active in the surrounding area. One mistake meant crashing into a canyon wall or getting shot down, but success meant removing 3 major enemy leaders and potentially saving hundreds of coalition lives. That was the calculus of war. She thought about Sawyer and Chen, wondered what they'd think of this mission. Probably the same thing she did: difficult, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Some missions couldn't be delegated to safer options. Some work required the best pilots willing to accept the highest risks. At 0730, she was back at the flight line. Yuma had her aircraft ready, fueled, and armed for the reconnaissance flight. Morrison was there too, unusual for this early in the morning. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. I'm sending you into one of the most dangerous flying environments in this entire theater. Sleep wasn't really an option. He handed her a tablet with updated intelligence. Weather forecast looks good. Clear skies, minimal wind. But remember, you're flying this at altitude today for reconnaissance only. No low-level work until tonight's mission. Understood, sir. She climbed into the cockpit and ran through her checklist with extra care. Every system had to be perfect for tonight's mission. She couldn't afford any mechanical issues. The takeoff was smooth, and she climbed to 20,000 feet before setting course for the canyon system. From this altitude, she could see the entire valley, the compound where the meeting would take place, and the surrounding air defense positions. She recorded everything, making mental notes about key terrain features she'd use for navigation. The canyon itself was even more impressive from above. A twisting channel carved through solid rock over millions of years, narrow and deep. Flying through it would be like threading a needle, at high speed, in the dark. She spent 3 hours over the target area, studying every detail. When she finally landed back at base, she had a complete mental map of the route. Now she just had to execute it under the worst possible conditions. Morrison met her as she climbed out of the cockpit. Well, it's doable, barely, but doable. That's what I needed to hear. Get some rest. We brief again at 1800 hours, then your wheels up at 2100 for the actual strike. Kestrel spent the afternoon in her quarters, alternating between rest and mental rehearsal of the flight profile. She visualized every turn, every landmark, every moment of the approach. By the time the second briefing came around, she could fly the route in her mind without error. The evening briefing was quick. Final weather check, communications verification, coordination with backup assets. Everything was as ready as it could be. At 2000 hours, Kestrel walked to her aircraft under the light of a crescent moon. Yuma and his crew had reconfigured the weapon's load for precision strike, 2 laser-guided bombs specifically selected for their accuracy and controlled blast radius. This is a big one, isn't it? Yuma asked quietly. Can't discuss it, Chief. Don't need to. I can see it in your face. Same look you had that time you came back with half your tail shot off. Determination and absolute focus. He finished his final checks and stepped back. Bring her home, Major. Bring yourself home. Kestrel strapped in, started her engines, and taxied to the runway. The tower cleared her for takeoff at 2103, and she rolled down the runway into the night sky. The first part of the flight was routine, climbing to altitude and setting course for the border region. She ran through her systems checks again, verified her weapons, tested her targeting pod. Everything green. At 2140, she reached the entry point for the canyon system. This was it. No more preparation, no more second-guessing, just execution. She pushed the stick forward and dove toward the canyon entrance, descending from 15,000 feet to 500 feet in less than 90 seconds. The terrain rose up to meet her, dark and imposing. She switched to terrain following radar and night vision systems, letting technology augment her own vision. The canyon walls appeared on either side, towering cliffs that compressed her entire world into a channel barely wider than her wingspan. She flew on pure instinct now, hands making constant tiny corrections to keep the A-10 centered in the canyon. Her airspeed was pushing 300 knots, fast enough to maintain control but slow enough to react to the winding terrain. The walls blurred past in shades of green through her night vision. Every nerve was alive, every sense focused. 5 minutes into the canyon run, she spotted the first landmark, a distinctive rock formation shaped like a broken tooth. Right on course. She banked hard left to follow the canyon's turn, pulling GS that pressed her into the seat. The next landmark came up 45 seconds later, exactly where it should be. She was threading the needle perfectly. Behind her, if anyone was tracking, they'd see nothing but terrain. The A-10 was flying too low and too masked for radar to acquire. She was a ghost, slipping through defenses that would have shredded a conventional approach. 10 minutes. 15. The canyon began to widen as she approached the target valley. She checked her weapons one more time, armed the laser-guided bombs, and prepared for the final phase. The compound appeared ahead, a cluster of buildings illuminated by security lights. She could see vehicles in the courtyard, people moving between structures. Intelligence had been accurate. The meeting was happening. At exactly 21:57, she pulled up from the canyon run and climbed to 3,000 feet. The sudden transition from compressed canyon walls to open sky was jarring, but she had no time to process it. She had 3 minutes to identify the target building, lock her weapons, and deliver the strike. Her targeting pod found the correct structure, a 2-story building in the compound center. She designated it with her laser and watched as the bomb seekers locked onto the reflected energy. At 21:59:30, she pickled both weapons. The bombs fell away, guiding themselves toward the laser spot with mechanical precision. Kestrel immediately banked hard right and dove back toward the canyon, not waiting to observe the impact. She needed to be back in terrain masking before air defenses could react. 2 seconds later, her headset crackled with the sound of explosions. The bombs had hit. Mission complete. Now she just had to escape. The return flight through the canyon was even more intense than the approach. Air defense radars were active now, searching for whoever had just struck the compound. But she was already back in the canyon system, invisible to their sensors. She flew the route in reverse, every turn familiar now, until finally the canyon walls opened up and she was back over friendly territory. The tension released all at once, leaving her momentarily shaky. She climbed to altitude and set course for base, checking in with command to report mission success. Morrison's voice came through immediately. Hog Ironside, confirmed strike on target. Confirmed. Both weapons impacted target building at time on target, building destroyed. Outstanding. Post-strike reconnaissance shows 3 confirmed enemy KIA, all matching our targets. This is a strategic success. Get yourself home safe. The landing was routine, but Kestrel's hands were trembling slightly as she shut down the engines. The adrenaline was fatting, replaced by exhaustion. She'd just flown one of the most technically demanding missions of her career, and it had gone perfectly. Yuma was there as always, and this time he was grinning. "Major, I don't know what you just did, but half the intelligence community has been blowing up the communications net. Whatever it was, it worked." Kestrel climbed out of the cockpit and stood on the tarmac, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the 3 enemy commanders would never plan another operation. Somewhere, coalition forces were safer because of what she'd just done. And somewhere, the memory of Sawyer and Chen felt a little less heavy. Morrison appeared from the operations building, walking quickly across the flight line. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Major Vance, on behalf of everyone involved in this operation, thank you. What you accomplish tonight will have repercussions across this entire theater." They shook, and Kestrel felt the full weight of his respect. "Just doing my job, sir." "No, you did far more than your job. You executed a mission that most pilots would refuse to attempt, and you did it flawlessly." He paused, then added, "There's going to be a formal commendation for this. I know it'll be classified, but the people who need to know will know." "I appreciate that, sir." Morrison started to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. Remember what I said about teaching, about passing on your knowledge. After this deployment, I'm going to make some calls. The Air Force has advanced training programs that need people like you as instructors. People who can teach the next generation not just how to fly, but how to think, how to trust themselves, how to execute impossible missions. Will you consider it?" Kestrel thought about the 8-year-old girl whose father had promised to tell her that excellence didn't need permission. Thought about all the young pilots who'd never have access to Meridian training but could still learn its lessons. "Yes, sir. I'll consider it seriously." "Good. Now get some rest. You've earned it." She walked back to her quarters through the quiet base, the night air cool against her skin. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight she could rest knowing that 18 years of service had led to this moment. A moment where competence was recognized, where judgment was trusted, where a female pilot had done work that transcended gender, rank, or politics. In her quarters, she looked at her tattoo one more time. The wings, the sword, the names of the fallen. Tomorrow she'd be back in the cockpit, flying another mission. But the meaning of that ink had deepened. It wasn't just about authorization or recognition anymore. It was about legacy, about the knowledge she'd gained and the obligation to pass it forward, about honoring those who didn't come home by ensuring their lessons weren't lost. She thought about all the people who'd laughed at her tattoo, who'd made assumptions about her capabilities, who'd judged her on everything except her performance. And she thought about how all of that had faded away when the work spoke for itself. That was the real lesson. Not that proving yourself to others mattered, but that proving yourself to yourself was everything. The rest was just noise. Kestrel turned off the light and lay down, her body exhausted but her mind at peace. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now she'd done her job, honored her friends, and flown into the darkness to bring others home. That was enough. That had always been enough. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's passage, while far below, a single pilot rested, ready for whatever dawn would bring.